The message came at 1:47 a.m. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, a dull vibration that felt heavier than it should have. I picked it up, squinting at the screen. If you can't contribute $40,000 to the founder's dinner, don't come. I can't afford another embarrassment. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I saw the name. Evan, my son. I read the message again, slower this time, waiting for confusion or anger to arrive. Neither did. What settled in instead was a numb stillness, the kind that spreads quietly, like cold water seeping through fabric. A second message followed. This isn't personal. It's about optics. Optics. I sat on the edge of my bed in my small apartment on the south side of Riverton, listening to the refrigerator hum and a bus hiss somewhere outside. The city kept moving. I didn't. Evan was 32 now, a cardiothoracic surgeon at North River Medical Center. Brilliant. Polished. The kind of man people leaned forward to listen to. The kind whose opinions carried weight before he even finished speaking. And apparently, the kind of man who needed his father either invisible or expensive enough to justify being seen. The dinner he mentioned wasn't just a dinner. It was the Riverton Medical Alliance Founders Gala, the kind of event where careers quietly tilted upward or stalled altogether. Donors, board members, department heads. Evan had mentioned it before, carefully and without detail, never actually asking if I'd be there. Now I understood why. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Instead, I set the phone down and looked at my hands. They were rough, permanently marked in ways no amount of scrubbing could erase. 30 years of overnight maintenance work had a way of sinking into your skin, no matter how clean you tried to be. Evan hated that smell. 2 months earlier, he'd completed his fellowship. The ceremony was held in a glass-walled auditorium overlooking the river. I hadn't attended. I hadn't even known about it. I found out 3 days later when a former coworker tagged me in a photo online. Evan stood in the center, white coat crisp, smiling beside colleagues I didn't recognize. The comments were full of congratulations. Your parents must be so proud. I called him that night. Hey, Dad, he said. Distracted. Busy. I saw the photos, I told him. Congratulations. There was a pause. Not long, but deliberate. Thanks, he said. It was mostly for staff. Mostly. That wasn't the moment something broke. That came later. It came at dinner. Evan invited me to Marrow and Stone, one of those downtown restaurants where the lighting is low and the menus don't list prices. I wore my best jacket, the one I'd bought years earlier for his college graduation. The cuffs were a little frayed, but it still fit. He arrived with a woman named Clara. Confident. Composed. The kind of person who never glanced at a price before ordering. Dad? Evan said, standing. This is Clara. She smiled politely. Nice to meet you. When she asked what I did, Evan answered before I could. He runs a small facilities service company, he said quickly. Mostly local contracts. Local. The word landed and stayed there. He changed the subject immediately. Throughout the meal, it kept happening. Questions redirected. Stories shortened. Any detail that lingered too long on me quietly smoothed away. When the check came, I reached for my wallet. Evan stopped me with a look. I've got it, he said. Not unkindly. Firm. That was when it clicked. This wasn't a celebration. It was a containment strategy. The message at 1:47 a.m. confirmed it. I wasn't just unwanted. I was a risk. What Evan didn't know, what he'd never asked, was how a man who cleaned office buildings overnight managed to pay every dollar of his medical education in cash. No loans. No debt. No favors. He didn't know about the accounts quietly growing in my name. Didn't know about the contracts negotiated after midnight meetings. Didn't know about the investments made month by month while he studied and slept. To him, I was still the man with the mop. And maybe that was my fault. I picked up my phone again and reread the message. Don't come. For 30 years, I had shown up anyway. That night, for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I didn't. And that was the moment everything began to change. I didn't reply to Evan's message. That alone altered the shape of the day. For most of my life, my reflex had been to respond quickly, clarify, soften, explain. I learned early that silence unsettled people, and unsettled people ask questions. So I filled the gaps before they could form. I made things easier. For them. For him. That night, I didn't. I woke at 5, same as always. The apartment was still dark, the air cold enough to sting. Coffee. Lunch packed. Keys on the counter. Nothing dramatic. No sense of resolve. Just the absence of a familiar impulse. I drove to the municipal complex where my crew started at 6. The building echoed the way it always did before offices filled with voices. I checked in with Marcos, then Carla. Schedules were on track. Supplies stocked. Nothing unusual. That was the point. My work had never depended on urgency. It depended on consistency. On being present when no one was watching and competent enough that no one needed to. Evan used to ask about my nights when he was younger. What buildings I cleaned. Who I worked with. Somewhere along the way, those questions stopped. It took me years to understand that it wasn't indifference. It was risk management. The less he knew, the less he had to explain. After the shift, I drove across town to my storage unit. Same narrow row of metal doors. Same padlock I'd replaced twice in 20 years. Inside, the boxes were stacked neatly, labeled in black marker, contracts, statements, licenses, insurance. I didn't open everything. I didn't need to. The order alone told the story. I'd started with one account and one client. Reinvested what I didn't need to survive. Not because I had some grand vision, but because waste made me uneasy. Money unused felt like exposure. When Evan was accepted into medical school, I didn't celebrate. I made spreadsheets. Tuition, housing, fees, equipment. Every number had a place. Every semester its own line. People assumed I'd taken loans. Evan assumed it too. I never corrected him. Debt felt like a promise I wasn't sure I'd be around to keep, so I paid in advance. Quietly, methodically. He thanked me once, early on. Said I didn't have to do this. That he could manage. I told him to focus on studying. After that, he stopped mentioning money at all. By the time his residency began, my business no longer required my presence every night. I trained supervisors. Extended contracts. Let growth happen slowly enough that it never called attention to itself. I didn't tell Evan. Not because I was hiding anything, but because he never asked. That afternoon, back at my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote 3 words at the top of the page. Visibility. Boundaries. Consequence. For years, I'd believed love meant absorption. Taking on discomfort so your child wouldn't have to. Removing obstacles before they became visible. But absorption has limits. If you remove every consequence, eventually you remove meaning. Evan believed he was being practical. From his perspective, this was a negotiation. Appearances mattered. Money solved friction. And I had always stepped in before. That was the pattern. The gala was in 4 days. I still hadn't responded. That evening, I opened my laptop and searched North River Medical Center. Not the glossy pages, but the disclosures. Capital projects. Vendor relationships. The sections most people never read. Hospitals were systems. Not just reputational ones. Contractual, financial, procedural. Names repeated across documents. One of them was mine. The realization didn't feel satisfying. It felt clarifying. I hadn't built leverage to use against my son. I'd built it because discipline compounds. Because what you do quietly still exists, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. My phone buzzed once. A message from Evan. I need to know if you're coming. I read it. Set the phone face down. For the first time, the question wasn't really about the gala. It was about whether I would keep shielding him from the consequences of erasing me. I folded the legal pad and slid it into a drawer. There was still time, but not much. By the second morning, the silence had weight. Evan called at 9:12 a.m. I was on site, listening to a facilities supervisor walk me through an issue with an aging ventilation system. The phone vibrated once in my pocket. I noticed it, acknowledged it, let it pass. I didn't feel anxious. I felt deliberate. That was new. An hour later, a message came through. Dad, I need an answer. No greeting. No apology. Just urgency, sharpened into expectation. By lunchtime, there were 2 more. This isn't about you. You know how these things work. The phrasing caught my attention. Not because it was cruel, but because it was familiar. It was the language of justification. Of someone smoothing a decision they believed was reasonable, even necessary. In the early afternoon, the tone shifted. I'm trying to protect both of us. Protect. That word appeared again at 3:46 p.m. By evening, it softened. I wish you'd just talk to me. I read that one twice. Then I set the phone down and opened my calendar. The gala was in 2 days. The next morning, my phone rang before 7. The caller ID surprised me. Elaine Porter, Administrative Director, North River Medical Center. Mr. Hale, she said warmly. Do you have a moment? I do, I said. We're reviewing long-term service contracts this quarter, she explained. Facilities, sanitation, environmental compliance. Your company's been a partner for a long time. She paused, just long enough for the word partner to register. With some restructuring underway, she continued, we're consolidating vendors. Nothing negative, just standard process. Consolidating. I wanted to ask, she added, if you'll be attending the Founders Gala on Friday. Several department heads will be there. It's often helpful to put faces to long-standing relationships. I leaned against my kitchen counter and looked out the window, where morning light cut clean lines across the glass. No, I said. I won't be attending. Another pause. Longer this time. I see, she said. If your availability changes. It won't, I said, gently but final. We exchanged polite goodbyes. When the call ended, I didn't move right away. Silence had consequences. It always did. That afternoon, Evan showed up at my apartment. I saw him through the peephole first, pacing, checking his watch, running a hand through his hair. When he finally knocked, it was measured, professional. The same knock he used at patient doors. I opened it. Relief crossed his face, then irritation. Why aren't you answering me? He asked, stepping inside without waiting. I closed the door behind him. You asked me to stay away, I said. I am. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. I meant, this has gotten more complicated. For who? I asked. He exhaled sharply. Elaine called me this morning. About the sanitation contracts. She asked if there was anything she should be concerned about. About optics. There it was again. What did you tell her? I asked. That everything was fine, he said. That you're reliable. Reliable. Not father. Not partner. Reliable. I told her you weren't coming to the gala, he added. She thought that was odd. I told her the same thing, I said. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. As if something in the room had shifted and he couldn't name it. This isn't how this was supposed to go, he said. I waited. You were supposed to either say yes, he continued, voice tightening, or get upset. We could have worked with either. And now? I asked. And now I don't know what you're doing, he said. And that makes me look unprepared. Unprepared. For the first time, the word belonged to him. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm not attending. I'm not contributing. I'm not explaining. You're forcing a situation, he said. No, I replied. I stopped preventing one. He turned away, pacing the small living room as if movement might restore control. You don't understand how this affects me, he said finally. I understand exactly, I said. I just don't think it's my responsibility anymore. His jaw tightened. So this is punishment. No, I said. It's consequence. The word landed heavier than I expected. He stopped pacing. You always stepped in before, he said quietly. I know. And now? Now, I said, you get to see what happens when I don't. He left 10 minutes later. No shouting. No resolution. Just uncertainty. That night, my phone stayed silent. And for the first time, I knew Evan was the one waiting. The decision wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation. No raised voices. No announcement. It arrived the way most real consequences do, through an email sent to people who didn't expect to be questioned. The morning after Evan left my apartment, I went to the office early. Not because I had to, but because routine steadied me. I reviewed schedules, signed off on payroll, and answered a handful of vendor inquiries that had nothing to do with hospitals or galas or sons. At 9:38 a.m., an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Vendor Consolidation, Environmental Services. From Procurement Review Committee. It wasn't addressed to me alone. 6 names were copied: administrators, compliance officers, a consultant whose firm specialized in operational efficiency. The message was brief. As part of our ongoing restructuring, the committee will be reviewing long-term service contracts across all departments. A preliminary recommendation will be drafted by Friday. Friday, the day of the gala. I read it once, then again, then closed my laptop. This was no longer about attendance. It was about presence. I spent the rest of the morning doing the work I'd always done, quietly removing friction from other people's systems. By noon, 2 supervisors stopped by with questions. One about overtime coverage. One about a broken floor buffer. Normal problems. Solvable ones. At 2:15 p.m., my phone rang. Evan. I watched it buzz on my desk until it stopped. A minute later, another call. Then a text. They've scheduled a review. Did you know about this? I didn't respond. Because I did know. And because this wasn't my move. It was the system doing what systems do when you stop cushioning them. By late afternoon, the emails began circulating more widely. Committee requests, performance summaries, compliance metrics. Numbers don't lie, but they also don't protect. By 5 o'clock, Evan was calling again. This time, I answered. What did you say to them? He asked, skipping any pretense. I didn't say anything, I replied. That's not possible, he said. This doesn't just happen. It happens all the time, I said. You just haven't been on this side of it. Silence on the line. Then, quieter. They're asking questions. They should, I said. You could fix this, he said. You could call Elaine. Clarify things. I could, I agreed. And you're not going to. No. Why? His voice tightened. Why now? I considered answering honestly. Because you asked me to disappear. Because I got tired of being managed. Because love doesn't mean erasure. Instead, I said, because this is how things work when I'm not smoothing the edges. He exhaled sharply. You're letting them misinterpret. No, I said. I'm letting them evaluate. That's not the same thing. It is, I said. You just don't like it. He didn't argue. That told me more than any protest could have. The next morning, another email arrived. Subject, request for attendance. From Procurement Review Committee. They wanted me present for the preliminary discussion. Not the gala. The review. I checked the time. Thursday, 10 a.m. I replied with a single sentence. I'll attend. An hour later, Evan was at my door again. This time, he knocked harder. You're going to the review? He asked the moment I opened it. Yes. And still not the gala. That's right. You're doing this on purpose, he said. No, I replied. I'm doing it correctly. His face flushed. They're going to connect things. They already have. You're humiliating me, he said. I looked at him carefully. No, I said. I'm not protecting you. That landed differently. They're asking whether my judgment is compromised, he said. Whether there's a conflict of interest. Is there? I asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it. I didn't ask you to interfere, he said finally. You asked me to disappear, I replied. This is what happens when I don't. He paced, rubbing his forehead. This could affect my standing. It already has, I said. He stopped moving. Then what do you want, he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time, the question wasn't useful. I want you to understand something, I said at last. This review isn't happening because of me. It's happening because systems notice absences. Patterns. Silence. He stared at me. You built your career assuming I would always absorb risk. I continued. I won't anymore. He swallowed. So this is it. No, I said. This is the part where things move without us. He left without another word. On Friday morning, I put on a clean jacket and drove downtown. Not to the gala, but to a windowless conference room where decisions were made in neutral tones and documented in bullet points. By the time the first drink was poured that evening, the recommendation had already been drafted, and Evan no longer controlled the story. The gala didn't begin with an announcement. There was no moment when conversation stopped or heads turned in unison. No glass tapped. No spotlight sweeping the room. It began with glances. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I wanted to be first, but because arriving late always felt like asking to be managed. The venue was the north atrium of the medical center. Glass walls, neutral colors, a space designed to look impressive without being memorable. I checked in at the registration table. The volunteer smiled. Name? Hale, I said. She looked down at her tablet, then back up. Her expression shifted, not wider, just more attentive. Oh, of course. Welcome, Mr. Hale. No hesitation. No follow-up question. She handed me a program with a small name card already tucked inside. I hadn't requested it. That was the first sign. Inside, the room hummed with the low, continuous noise of practiced ease. Conversations overlapped. Laughter appeared on cue. Servers moved smoothly between clusters, trays balanced like extensions of their arms. I stayed near the edge at first, letting the space orient itself around me. It always did. Within minutes, someone approached. Mr. Hale, a man said, extending his hand. Richard Coleman. Procurement oversight. I shook it. I wanted to say, he added, lowering his voice slightly. Your documentation was thorough. Refreshing. Thank you, I said. We don't often see that level of consistency, he continued. It made the review straightforward. Straightforward. Not generous. Not flattering. Objective. Another person joined us. Then another. Introductions layered quietly. Names, titles, brief acknowledgments. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. But I noticed something else. Evan hadn't approached me. I found him near the center of the room, surrounded by colleagues. He looked composed, laughing at the right moments, nodding when expected, but his eyes kept drifting, tracking. When our gazes met, he froze for half a second before recovering. That was the second sign. A woman from the compliance committee stopped beside me. "Mr. Hale," she said, "thank you for attending. Your presence is appreciated." Appreciated, not tolerated. She moved on before I could reply. Across the room, Evan watched the exchange. The shift wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Rooms like this didn't run on confrontation. They ran on inference. People noticed who was greeted first, who wasn't corrected, who spoke and wasn't interrupted. By the time dinner was served, my place card had been moved closer to the front. I hadn't asked for that either. Evan approached midway through the first course. "You said you weren't coming," he said quietly, standing beside my chair. "I said I wasn't attending the gala," I replied. "I didn't say I wouldn't be present." He glanced around, then back at me. "They're asking about you." I nodded. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "The truth." He swallowed. "Which is?" "That I provide services," I said. "That I show up when contracted. That I don't interfere." His jaw tightened. "They're treating you like." "Like what?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "This is making things complicated." "For who?" I asked. "For me," he admitted. That was new. Before he could continue, a senior administrator stepped in. "Evan," she said warmly. "Good to see you. I didn't realize you were connected to Mr. Hale." "Connected?" Evan hesitated, just long enough. "Yes," he said. "He's my father." She smiled. "You must be proud. His work speaks for itself." Evan nodded too quickly. She turned to me. "We're grateful for your professionalism. It's rare." Rare. When she walked away, Evan remained standing. "You didn't warn me," he said. "I wasn't aware I needed to," I replied. He looked down at the table. "They think you're important." I considered that. I said, "they think I'm consistent." That's not the same thing. It is in rooms like this. He sat down slowly, as if uncertain the chair would hold him. "I thought keeping things separate would protect me," he said. I looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. "It did," I said, until it didn't. We sat in silence as the next course was served. Around us, conversations continued. Laughter rose and fell. The evening moved forward, unaffected. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't being introduced anymore. People already knew. And Evan, who had once controlled how I appeared in rooms like this, was learning what it felt like to enter one without that control. The night ended without incident. No scenes. No speeches. Just a recalibration. As I stood to leave, the procurement chair shook my hand. "We'll be in touch," he said. "There may be additional opportunities." I thanked him and walked out. Behind me, Evan remained seated. For the first time, he wasn't being watched. He was being evaluated. Loss doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a calendar change, a meeting moved, a question that used to be answered and suddenly isn't. Evan felt it the following Monday. He told me later that the first sign came as an email, brief, polite, and carefully worded. Departmental planning meeting, attendance update. His name was no longer on the list. At first, he assumed it was a mistake. Schedules changed. Administrators misclicked. He forwarded the email to his coordinator with a short note. "I think I was removed in error." The reply came an hour later. "This meeting will be limited to senior staff and department leadership. Thank you for understanding." Understanding. That word again. By midweek, it happened twice more. A research committee he'd been advising stopped requesting his input. A donor luncheon he attended every quarter was suddenly at capacity. None of it was overt. No reprimands. No explanations. That was the point. Institutions didn't punish, they adjusted. I heard about it indirectly. A supervisor mentioned Evan seemed distracted. Someone else said he'd missed a routine check-in he'd never missed before. I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't care, but because care had too often been mistaken for intervention. On Thursday afternoon, Evan came to my apartment again. This time, he didn't knock. He waited. When I opened the door, he looked smaller somehow. Not defeated, but stripped of certainty. "They've changed how they treat me," he said, still standing in the hallway. I stepped aside and let him in. They're not hostile, he continued. Just careful, careful. They ask questions differently, he said. About judgment. About boundaries. I poured coffee and waited. They asked whether I disclosed everything, he went on. If there were any relationships that might complicate decision-making. And what did you say? I asked. That there wasn't, he replied. The words stayed between us. Is that true? I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, sat down heavily. I didn't think it mattered, he said. You weren't involved. I was present, I said. That's not how I saw it, he replied. I nodded. I know. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit from childhood. They didn't accuse me of anything, he said. They just stopped assuming. Assuming. That was the loss. For years, Evan had moved through systems buoyed by unspoken confidence. Doors opened not because he demanded it, but because no one questioned whether they should. Now they were questioning. They postponed my promotion review, he said quietly. I looked at him. Postponed, he clarified. Not denied. Just delayed. Delays mattered. Why? I asked. They said they needed more time, he said. To assess. Assess what? He didn't need to say it. Character. Judgment. Boundaries. They asked me something yesterday, he continued. They asked whether I understood the difference between influence and interference. I didn't respond. They asked if I'd ever asked you to adjust your behavior for my benefit. He looked up at me. I didn't answer. That was new. I didn't lie, he added quickly. I just didn't know how to say it without making it worse. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't mine. They're watching how I handle this, he said. Not what happened, but what I do next. That was the system teaching him something. Not through punishment. Through absence. I set the coffee in front of him. You thought protecting your image would protect your career? I said. It did, for a while. He nodded slowly. But careers aren't built on control, I continued. They're built on trust. And trust doesn't survive secrecy. He stared into the mug. I didn't think hiding you was hiding anything important, he said. I know, I replied. That's why this hurts. He looked up, eyes tired. I don't know how to fix this, he said. I considered that. For the first time, he wasn't asking me to step in. He was asking how to stand. You don't fix it, I said. You live with it. With what, he asked. With the consequences of your choices, I replied. Long enough for people to see who you are when no one is smoothing things out. He nodded. Slowly. Painfully. And us? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Because this wasn't about resolution yet. This isn't about punishment, I said finally. It's about alignment. Between who you are and how you move through the world. He sat quietly for a long time. When he stood to leave, he didn't apologize. Not yet. Instead, he said, they're not watching you anymore. I met his gaze. They're watching me. Yes, I said. Now you know how that feels. He left without another word. That night, my phone didn't ring. And for the first time, I didn't wonder if it would. Reckoning doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in repetitions. In choices made when no one is tracking them. In habits that either change or harden. For Evan, it began quietly. He stopped correcting people. When someone mentioned the review process, he didn't deflect. When a colleague asked about his father, he didn't redirect or minimize. He answered plainly, then let the conversation move where it would. That alone cost him. People were polite, careful, curious in a way that had edges. But something else happened too. They listened. Without the armor of explanation, Evan had to sit with discomfort, with pauses that stretched longer than he liked, with questions that didn't have answers he could shape. He stopped attending events he once treated as obligations, not out of protest, but because he wasn't invited to some of them anymore. Instead, he took on shifts no one wanted. The free clinic on the east side needed coverage on Tuesday nights. He signed up. The cardiac rehab unit needed a volunteer liaison for patients without insurance. He agreed. He didn't announce any of it. I heard about it secondhand, from a nurse I knew, from a former colleague who crossed paths with him unexpectedly. They didn't praise him. They observed him. He stays late, one of them told me. He listens, another said. He doesn't rush anymore. Weeks passed. Then months. The system didn't reward him quickly. That was part of the lesson. His promotion review remained postponed. Not denied, just suspended in that uncomfortable space where effort had to come before outcome. He didn't complain. That surprised me. The first time Evan reached out after that stretch of silence, it wasn't to ask for anything. It was a message sent late, without urgency. I'm starting to understand what you meant about standing. I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because understanding didn't need applause. A few weeks later, another message arrived. They asked me to help design new disclosure guidelines. I said yes. I read it twice. That was work no one volunteered for unless they intended to be changed by it. The next time I saw Evan in person was at the park where he used to practice riding a bike. The bench was still there, weathered but intact. He looked tired, leaner, less polished. He didn't sit right away. I'm not here to fix anything, he said. I just wanted you to know what I'm doing. I nodded. They're not treating me differently yet, he continued. But they're watching. I said nothing. I think that's fair, he added. That was new. I used to think trust was something you earned once, he said. Like a credential. Now I think it's something people keep deciding whether to extend. I watched a couple pass with a toddler wobbling between them. That's closer, I said. He exhaled. I'm not asking you to step back in. I looked at him. I know, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know I won't ask again. Silence settled between us. Not heavy, not strained. Different. They asked me why I didn't disclose earlier, he said after a moment. I told them the truth. I waited. That I thought I was protecting my independence, he said. But really, I was protecting my image. He looked at me then. I didn't realize how fragile that made everything. I studied his face. The familiar lines were still there, but the confidence had changed shape. Less performative. More careful. What did they say? I asked. They said integrity isn't about avoiding conflicts, he replied. It's about how you handle them once they exist. I nodded. That's the part one missed, he said. We sat quietly for a while. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. I don't know if there's a version of this where things go back, he said. There isn't, I replied. He absorbed that. But there might be a version where things go forward, I added. He nodded slowly. That night, while clearing a drawer, I found an old envelope. Inside was a photo, Evan at 10 years old, standing beside a freshly cleaned office building, beaming like he'd built it himself. On the back, in my handwriting, first job he helped me with. I set it back where it belonged. Some things didn't need to be relabeled. A month later, Evan texted again. They approved the guidelines. They asked me to chair the implementation. No exclamation points. Just information. Progress without celebration. I typed back a single sentence. Keep going. He replied almost immediately. I will. And for the first time since all this began, I believed him. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what keeps moving once you stop intervening. I understood that more clearly in the months that followed. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. The scholarship fund was approved quietly. No ceremony. No press release. Just a line item in a board agenda and a follow-up email asking for parameters. I suggested a few. Need over pedigree. Consistency over charisma. A short essay, not about ambition, but about who made it possible. The applications arrived in early spring. There were many. I read them slowly. Not for achievement, but for honesty. One stayed with me longer than the others. A student whose mother cleaned offices overnight, who wrote about learning to fall asleep to the sound of keys and carts in hallways meant for other people. He didn't ask to be admired. He asked to be trusted. I approved 3 recipients. That felt right. Evan didn't attend the review meeting where the final decision was signed. He wasn't invited. He didn't ask to be. He learned about it later, from an internal memo forwarded without comment. That was part of the recalibration. When his promotion review finally resumed, it did so without ceremony. No accelerated timeline. No assurances. Just criteria. There was a pause. Long enough to matter. Then he passed. Not because of proximity. Not because of leverage. Because the months in between had left a record no one could argue with. He told me afterward, not with relief, but with understanding. They didn't congratulate me, he said. They just moved forward. That's how trust works, I replied. He nodded. We didn't see each other often. When we did, it was deliberate, measured. No attempts to compress time or repair history through volume. Once, he asked me about the storage unit. Not the money. The boxes. How did you know what to keep, he asked. I didn't, I said. I just didn't throw away what still mattered. He sat with that. Late that summer, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a photo. Evan at the free clinic, sleeves rolled up, listening to a patient with the kind of attention you couldn't rehearse. On the back, in his handwriting, Tuesday nights. I'm learning. I placed it in a drawer with another photo already there. Some things didn't need framing. The last conversation we had that year came without planning. He called while I was walking home. I was asked something today, he said. What? I asked. They asked who taught me how to work when no one's watching. I stopped walking. I told them I was still learning, he continued, but that I knew where I learned it. That was enough. When the first scholarship recipients arrived for orientation, I attended, not as a speaker, not as a donor, just present. A student mistook me for staff and asked where to go. I pointed her down the hall. Later, I walked through the back corridors of the hospital, not the atrium, not the offices. The places that smelled faintly of disinfectant and effort. A young man passed me, pushing a cart of supplies. He nodded. I nodded back. Outside, the city settled into itself. Lights came on. People went home. Systems continued. Somewhere in all of it, my son was becoming someone who no longer needed to manage where I stood. And I no longer needed to be seen to matter. Legacy, I realized, isn't recognition. It's alignment between who you are, what you do, and what you refuse to hide. When I reached my apartment, my phone buzzed. A message from Evan. I don't know if I'll ever make this right. I typed back slowly. You're not meant to make it right. You're meant to make it true. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Finally, I understand. I believed him, and that was enough.